Two major cities in China are in lockdown tonight.
A new type of coronavirus was
In the spread of COVID-19.
A pandemic erupts and causes havoc worldwide. The spotlight is now back on infectious diseases that threaten humanity. This series will follow top scientists hunting viruses, bacteria, and mosquito-borne diseases. They're looking for the next killer outbreak before time runs out. Western Thailand, right on the border with Myanmar. A disease hunter is doing crucial new research. Supaporn Wacharaprusadi has spent 20 years studying the world's only flying mammal, the bat.
แล้วก็พบว่ามันมีความน่าสนใจมี challenge ต่างๆมากมายนะคะที่มีคำถามวิจัยที่ยังรอการค้นพบที่เราก็อยากจะค่อยๆเข้าไปค้นหามันแล้วก็หาคำตอบให้ได้ค่ะลดน้ำหนัก
Ecologist Prateep Dwankar will catch the bats Supaporn wants to study. As Supaporn's team sets up a mobile lab, Prateep's team goes to survey local bat caves. It's an urgent trip, and it's not just any bat they're after. They want to find the horseshoe bat, linked to an ongoing global pandemic.
สำหรับความสำคัญของการค้นหาเชื้อไวรัสโคโรนาในค้างคาวมงกุฎกับประเทศไทยมีความสำคัญมากนะคะเพราะว่าการที่พบว่าที่มีรายงานที่ประเทศจีนพบเชื้อไวรัสโควิด -19 ในค้างคาวมงกุฎแล้วประเทศไทยก็มีค้างคาวมงกุฎเหมือนกันนะคะความเสี่ยงอยู่ในระดับไหนแล้วเราจะเตรียมความพร้อมเพื่อไม่ให้เกิดการแพร่เชื้อจากค้างคาวมาสู่สัตว์ตัวกลางหรือว่าสู่คนเพื่อไม่ให้เกิดoutbreak ในระดับพื้นที่จากค้างคาวได้หรือไม่ค่ะ
Marks on the cave walls indicate hundreds, perhaps thousands of bats, but the team doesn't initially find any horseshoe bats.
ค้างคาวเองเนี่ยพอถึงฤดูกาลเนี่ยเขาจะมีการอพยพกันระหว่างถ้ำหนึ่งไปอีกถ้ำหนึ่งไปอีกถ้ำหนึ่งซึ่งแถวเนี้ยถ้ำเยอะมากอาจจะไปอยู่อีกถ้ำหนึ่งอะไรเงี้ยนะก็เป็นลักษณะแบบนั้น
They'll rely on a net covering the cave entrance, which the bats will hit when they fly out to feed on insects. All they can do now is wait till dark and hope for the best. Their patience pays off. The small bat with the big reputation finally makes an appearance. The horseshoe is one of 150 bat species in Thailand. The team try to catch as many bats as they can as the clock ticks. Back at the makeshift lab, Supaporn has heard that her precious and potentially dangerous cargo is on the way.
เรื่องของโรคบอดใหม่ค่ะก็ส่วนใหญ่จะเป็นเรื่องของโรคจากสัตว์สู่คนแล้วก็หลายๆโรคค่ะก็จะมีค้างคาวเป็นแหล่งรังโรคเป็นรีเซอร์นะคะก็ยกตัวอย่างเช่นเรื่องของอีโบลานะคะเรื่องของโรคซาร์สโรคเมอร์สนะคะรวมทั้งโควิด -19 ด้วยอันนี้รอบผสมกี่ตัวคะ
มีทั้งหมด50 ตัว
50 ตัว
ได้
The bats are first measured.
ถึง 30.54 ค่ะ
An oral swab captures saliva. An anal swab retrieves feces. Then blood is extracted. And a tissue sample will help confirm the species via DNA. The process goes on late into the night as more bats arrive. They include species other than horseshoe bats, but they're tested as well. The bats are released and will find their way home. It's a lot of activity and attention for someone who didn't originally want it.
ก็จริงๆแล้วตอนเด็กๆเป็นคนที่ไม่ค่อยชอบสุงสิงกับใครชอบอยู่เงียบๆค่ะก็เลยคิดว่าการเป็นนักวิทยาศาสตร์เนี่ยก็คืออยู่ในห้องแลบแล้วก็ทำงานกับตัวอย่างอะไรเงี้ยค่ะทำงานกับเราทดลองประมาณนี้ค่ะไม่ต้องเจอผู้คนมากนักอะไรประมาณนี้ค่ะแต่ว่าพอทำมาถึงทุกวันนี้ก็เลยรู้ว่าคิดผิดค่ะมันกลายเป็นวิทยาศาสตร์ส่วนหนึ่งต้องอยู่ในห้องแลบอีกส่วนหนึ่งก็ต้องไปข้างนอกไปเจอคนแล้วก็ไปสื่อสารกับคนจะต้องสื่อสารวิทยาศาสตร์ให้คนอื่นเข้าใจมากขึ้น
In Bangkok, it's the next stage of work for Superporn's lab team. They've got samples from 100 bats. They're using a range of tools to analyze the samples, including genetic sequencing. In early 2020, Superporn was the first scientist outside China to confirm a COVID-19 case, just a day after the virus's genetic sequence was released. Her unit is racing to develop a vaccine like so many others. The pandemic has upended her usual research and has meant 4 hours sleep a night for months on end.
ก็สำหรับครอบครัวนะคะก็ต้องขอบคุณครอบครัวที่ท่านก็ทุกคุณพ่อคุณแม่ค่ะให้สนับสนุนให้เราได้ทำประโยชน์เพื่อส่วนรวม
The sampling and testing will continue for a few months to detect any COVID-19 connection in Thai bats. For now, Superporn is not ready to reveal any results. At an isolated animal research centre in Singapore, Dr. Wang Linfa is also studying bats up close, but with a twist. These are cave nectar bats, and they're being bred here, not studied in the wild. This colony is one of the few of its kind anywhere. It's backed by the Singapore government and Duke NUS Medical School.
So I think that this, without bragging it, make us one of the really world leaders in bat research.
Every few months, the bats are given a health check, including for viruses.
In terms of the number of coronavirus that bats carries, nobody knows. I think that currently we have at least 1,000 different coronavirus already discovered, and that most people thinking what we discover is 1% of what's really in the nature. Yeah, so that's many, many more. These cave nectar bats, they can really lick very long tongue, and they lick their head and their body, and they're also very social animals, so they can have urine contamination. So from the head, we can sample, and then this sample goes back to the lab, and we can test if they carry any virus.
But Linfa's team is no longer looking for new viruses. They're interested in the relationship between viruses and their hosts. They're unlocking the mystery of why bats carry so many viruses without being affected by them, and the lessons that could be applied to human health. Viruses can infect all forms of life. They're microscopic fragments of genetic information wrapped in protein and can't multiply without a host. So they hijack cells and, as they replicate, damage the host's DNA. The normal immune response in humans and other mammals is for special sensors to activate inflammation. This sends immune cells to kill the virus and repair the damage. But research shows that doesn't happen in bats. Even with a lot of virus present, their inflammation sensors barely activate.
And then they don't overfight to try to clear the virus. Like we human and most of the animal we do is when a new virus comes in, we fight. So we have a cliche, virologists say very few virus kills us. We kill ourselves. So we are less likely to coexist with virus than bats. But now we actually found that bats can teach us lessons. They have long lifespan, less prone to cancer, so on. Bats basically can offer a lot of lessons for us to learn and to translate into medical research.
But there are still threats that must be studied. Research shows that in trying to beat the bat's immune system, some viruses have adapted to spread more quickly among cells. That spells trouble when those viruses encounter a weaker immune system, like that in humans. But bats are not the bad guy. They make up a quarter of all mammal species and are essential for pollination and controlling disease-carrying insects like mosquitoes.
Bats have been on Earth much, much longer than humans. So we were the latecomers, they were the natives, right? So they have been around for at least 65 million years,
It's humans that are causing the spillover of viruses.
If you go by the last 20 years and you look towards the next 20 years, unless we do major changing of how we treat with wildlife, how we do farming, how we travel, how we transport, if we don't change, then it's almost certain, right, there will be more outbreaks.
It's the changing relationship between humans and nature which is seeing many viruses unleashed.
This is dangerous. This is the kind of thing that leads to bird flu. There's more animals for sale now, so they're reopening. This is not good.
And that's where other disease hunters are focusing their efforts to prevent the next pandemic. In Bangkok, the link between wildlife and viruses is under the microscope. Scientists think a bat virus may have jumped to humans at a market in Wuhan, China, via an intermediary animal, causing the COVID-19 outbreak. Is there a similar risk at the famous Chatuchak market? Steve Galster heads the anti-trafficking group Freeland, which managed to get the animal section here shut down when COVID-19 broke out.
For the last almost 30 years, my colleagues and I have been warning about the potential outbreak of zoonotic diseases, zoonotic outbreaks from wildlife trade, because all these animals can carry infectious diseases.
The sellers won't be happy to see Steve. As he goes deeper into the market, a hidden camera is needed.
Lots of different species, lots of different smells. Lots of different kinds of birds here, poultry, you got some wild ducks, you got some bred ones. all mixed together on top of each other. Pigeons, wild turkeys, even vultures in here. This is dangerous. This is the kind of thing that leads to bird flu. So here in cages right next to each other, we've got adult raccoons next to capybara, which is from South America. It's from North America. Cages right next to each other. This is the biggest rodent in the world. And on top of here, I think these marmosets on top of the capybara. And on the left here, we've got some kind of primate. Hello. But the market is a little busier than I expected. There's more animals for sale now, so they're reopening. This is not good.
I think these wildlife markets, not just Wuhan, but across the region really are ticking time bombs. And what we just saw here is, it's like a biological warfare lab. Any one animal can transmit a pathogen to another. Somebody buys it, handles it, takes it home as a pet or eats it. Boom, we have another pandemic.
What do we got?
Back at the office, Steve's small team is using science to track the trade and disease.
So we've got one of our staff here extracting data from a phone. Normally we do this with the police. The police ask us to do this because we help them with the technology.
The phone data is analysed using artificial intelligence to track contacts. The algorithms can help identify who's handling finances and even who's the boss.
It basically allows us to see who's who in the zoo. This artificial intelligence basically makes us dangerous toward the traffickers.
And the team has developed an app that identifies which animals can be traded legally and whether they carry viruses dangerous to humans.
So the trade on the surface looks like a bunch of normal, sometimes low to middle class people just making a buck selling birds, lizards, or whatever. That's not it. Behind it, it's organized crime and corruption.
Freeland wants the wildlife trade banned, but it's only part of the virus puzzle. On an early morning in southern Cambodia, disease hunter Vibol Ho from the renowned Pasteur Institute is collecting traps. His target, rodents, especially rats. This is brand new research, prompted by recent cases of hepatitis E jumping from rats to humans in places like Hong Kong. It's a sign that scientists always have to be on the lookout for emerging diseases before they can spread. Vibol's team will also test for arenaviruses after a new outbreak of Lassa fever in Africa.
តែយើងដឹងថាវានឹងវាអាចបង្កមនុស្សស្លាប់អញ្ចឹងក៏យើងព្យាយាមថាចង់រកថាតើប្រជាជនខ្មែរយើងមានផលប៉ះពាល់អីខ្លះចំពោះវិធីហ្នឹង So we have his own trap. So this is a local trap.
It was Vibol's own childhood struggle with illnesses like malaria that led him into a life of research.
ហើយវាតនឹងជំងឺមួយចំនួនដែលយើងគិតថាស្រុកខ្មែរយើងវាជាប្រទេសកំពុងអភិវឌ្ឍអញ្ចឹងមានជំងឺមួយចំនួនដែលវាអាចប៉ះពាល់ដល់ក្មេងឬក៏ប្រជាជនទូទៅប៉ុន្តែយើងអត់ដឹងពីមូលហេតុខ្ញុំគិតថាការងារខ្ញុំនឹងចូលរួមចំណែកមួយចំនួនធំក្នុងការដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាទាំងអស់ហ្នឹង
Rodents thrive in human environments and when ecosystems are disrupted, removing their natural predators. Near the team's research work are scenes being repeated across Southeast Asia. Humans are pushing further into the forest for agriculture, housing and roads. In return, viruses once kept within the canopy are spilling over. The WHO estimates that about 70% of all infectious diseases affecting humans come from animals. For years, the Pasteur scientists have contributed their findings to special databases. A predictive pandemic map, updated in 2020, shows hotspots with a greater risk of virus transmission to humans. Rodents and bats are among the main sources of disease. Unlike the animals caught for testing in other research, these rodents won't make it out alive.
ជាធម្មតាយើងអត់ចង់ស្លាប់កដោទាំងអស់ព្រោះតែវាជាជីវិតមួយយើងគោលបំណងគឺយើងគ្រាន់តែចង់ស្វែងរកអ្វី
On top of the usual sampling, the animals are dissected and their organs are harvested to analyze back in the main lab. Later the same day, the team heads out to place more traps. A follow-up team will also take samples from the villagers.
តែនេះតែថ្ងៃទី 2 ចឹងខ្ញុំដាក់នៅភូមិសិនអរគុណចឹងកន្លែងណាដែលគាត់ឃើញពីងហ្នឹងក្នុងក្រាមបានបាទហ្នឹងហើយ
The first stage of this research is determining the prevalence of viruses in local rats and residents. That will lead to action and perhaps antiviral treatments later. Back in Phnom Penh, the samples will undergo intensive testing.
Because this is from breeding stuff.
Vibol updates his colleague, Eric Carlson, on his research.
It looks like we have a good positive on this one.
Yeah.
Is that right? So you got a good positive. That's really awesome.
Yeah, we have a good positive. Yeah. It's quite interesting.
This is at the market.
And while Vibol follows up on emerging pathogens, Eric oversees surveillance of a serious ongoing threat.
Here in Southeast Asia is a hotspot of avian influenza. We have numerous cases and it's been circulating endemically in bird populations for 20 plus years. We're still seeing human avian influenza cases in Asia. We still see new subtypes emerging.
Cases usually increase around festivals when the demand for poultry explodes. But bird flu is seen as such a risk that Eric's team tests at markets 16 times a year.
So the reason that we have to monitor influenza so closely is that it mutates so rapidly. Now, most of the time, those mutations aren't going to do much to the virus. However, sometimes it can change the way it binds to a cell, so it can go maybe better into a human. Sometimes it means it can replicate faster. Sometimes it means that it can get around antivirals that we have. And those are all really major problems.
The markets themselves pose an additional risk. Birds are killed on site before being taken to local restaurants. The blood makes these areas what scientists call bioinsecure and increases the chances of a virus infecting workers.
The more times it jumps into a human, the more chance it has to adapt to human physiology, to make it a worse disease in humans, and then eventually that's going to possibly become transmissible from human to human, and that's when we end up with another pandemic.
When a virus makes it from a market setting to other parts of our towns and cities, the danger grows. Transmission can include saliva expelled into the air, and a new virus reaches someone else's airways. It hits mucous membranes and enters a cell. The viruses adaptable to humans have a structure like a protein spike that fits with receptors on the human cell. This effectively unlocks the door. The cell has mechanisms to reproduce human DNA, which the virus takes over to make copies of itself. The copies leave and infect other cells, especially if the immune system doesn't mount an early response. In another part of Phnom Penh, epidemiologist Arata Hidano is testing animals that might pose an even higher pandemic risk than birds. He's from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Disease, partnered with Singapore's Duke NUS Medical School. This is a pig slaughterhouse.
Okay, let's take samples.
Arata's team is testing for H1N1 swine flu. It's a new project funded by the US Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which normally focuses on weapons of mass destruction. That's how seriously experts are taking the pandemic threat.
Of course, they are interested in biological weapons, but they're also interested in emerging viruses that can threaten public health and also economic of many countries in the world.
The pork industry is getting bigger and more intensive as the region's human population grows and can afford more animal protein. But the way pigs are raised and transported is bringing them in closer contact with each other, with other animals, and with humans. And pigs have a special vulnerability. They have receptors in their airways that bind to flu viruses from both birds and humans.
And this is concern because when these two different viruses infect one cell at the same time, inside the cell, they can create new type of virus that have different genetic components from bird and human virus. That means we are very susceptible, we don't have immunities, and that can potentially cause a pandemic.
It was H1N1 swine flu that caused the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, which killed tens of millions of people. That strain faded away, but new ones keep emerging. Scientists like Arata now have a more sophisticated understanding of the viruses transmitted between animals and the ones that might affect us. But it's still not enough.
We have to remember that there are so many viruses we don't know yet in the world. We just started discovering, and as we search more, we will find more.
This trained veterinarian got into epidemiology because he became fascinated by the role humans play in unleashing viruses.
There's always constant feedback loop between our behaviors and how disease spreads. And without understanding this system, we can't control the disease.
And it's partly human behavior that explains why viruses that should have been eliminated by now are still a threat, with a painful human cost. In Singapore, a hospital dating back more than 100 years is no longer needed and awaits redevelopment. It once housed patients stricken with viruses and other diseases that were dreaded worldwide, like bubonic plague and smallpox. Smallpox killed hundreds of millions over the centuries. From the late 1960s, a concerted effort of tracing and vaccination got underway, and smallpox was eradicated by 1980. The hospital also treated victims of polio. That crippling virus had its last local case in 1978. Experts thought polio would follow smallpox and be eradicated everywhere by the 1990s. So what went wrong? In the Philippines, community nurse Claudia Domdom is on an urgent mission in a city east of Manila. She's looking for children who have not been vaccinated against polio. She's got one more week to reach 95% of them in a community of 10,000 people.
Okay, oh, tapos na.
Yeah.
Okay.
This comes after the country saw its first polio outbreak in almost 20 years.
Ikaw naman. Very good. Galing.
Napakahirap po mag-house to house. Mas lalo na ngayon, nasa gitna tayo ng pandemya. So, iisipin mo yung target na kailangan mo accomplish.
One of the challenges is growing resistance from parents.
Dito kasi sigurado si Mrs. Kasi lalo na pinagbilinan ko kami sa Marilao na katulad ngayon may lumalabas na nagpapakuna na ito nga, di ba, may issue tayo.
At saka talagang tumatanggi sila. Natatakot sila, no? Kasi may mga naririnig silang balita through social media or TV na yung mga vaccine na hindi daw safe magtanggap ng vaccine. May mga ganun kasi kami naririnig na rason.
So-called wild polio was officially eradicated here in 2000. The danger now is vaccine-derived polio. The Philippines and some other countries use a cheap oral vaccine that contains a weakened but live version of the virus. It can mutate and be released back into the environment, usually through defecation. So it threatens children who aren't immunized. To be safe, a society needs 95% vaccination for herd immunity. The percentage here and elsewhere has been slipping below that target for years. Wild polio now only exists in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but in 2020, vaccine-derived polio cases were reported in 18 countries. It's an insidious and highly contagious disease. The virus usually replicates in the intestines, but if it gets into the nervous system, it damages motor neurons, which send messages to muscles. They waste away, causing paralysis in the limbs. Cranial nerves can also be paralyzed, affecting swallowing and talking. And it can affect the lungs, making breathing difficult or impossible.
Tapusin na lang natin to, tapos kain tayo saglit.
So Claudia pushes on. Her target is to immunize 1,000 children this week, or 200 a day.
Thank you.
Pinangarap ko maging nurse kasi simula nung pagkabata ko, yun na talaga yung napipicture ko na magiging paglaki ko. Mahal na mahal ko yung trabaho ko, kaya kapag nagawa ko ng tama yung trabaho ko at nagbigay ako ng care sa mga patients ko. So, parang minamahal din nila ako ng totoo, ng talagang buong puso.
Hundreds of kilometers to the south, doctors are still finding victims of the new polio outbreak. 3-year-old Alzamir can no longer walk. His 21-year-old father has to look after him all day.
Hindi ko po na alam na meron pa rin ng sakit na ganyan, ay polio. Wala pang sakit ng anak ko. Sobrang masayahin siya. Mga anak ko nagkuhanawa ng mga mananaway pagitong ko sa kapag gay ko sa wata ko di rin pakalakaw.
They live with Alzamir's grandmother. His mother has left.
Plaka wa bana sa kanin mambo. Iba ko sa kanin matapi kagilkan ako sa kayo sa kanino. Kaya akong tali mo na di makagkumaan.
This swampy, impoverished area has typical polio risk factors. Sanitation is a challenge with a communal toilet. Alzamir can't even make it that far. He defecates on the porch, and his father deals with it. It's likely Alzamir was infected from local water or surfaces tainted with fecal matter. Sometimes the family travels more than an hour to go to hospital. Pediatrician Giulietta Siapno is overseeing more than half a dozen children with polio. They get a checkup and sometimes rehab sessions.
Of course, it is very frustrating. I feel sad because polio is one of the vaccine-preventable diseases. There is a possibility that the outbreak will become serious if we will not be able to control it as soon as possible.
The numbers are still in the hundreds worldwide, but the WHO says if just one child is infected, children in all countries are at risk. It warns that if polio isn't eradicated, there could be up to 200,000 new cases a year within 10 years. For now, Alzamir faces a lifetime of challenges that could have been avoided. Back in San Jose del Monte, a month has passed, and Claudia is doing vaccinations for other diseases. She's been off work because she and her husband contracted COVID-19.
Mabigat yung katawan mo, masakit. Ang ano talaga yung sakit ng katawan. As in lahat, from joints mo sa daliri, sa wrist mo, sa tuhod, sa balakang. Yun ang lagi kong dinadasal. Huwag naman sana mahawa yung mga bata. Tapos maririnig mo yung anak mo, umiiyak kasi gusto ko tabihan, hindi pwede. Yun. Yun ang pinakamahirap.
But her work continues to fight disease and prevent more suffering.
Kasi yun ang sinumpaan kong tungkulin. Nanumpa ako eh.
Experts say richer nations should help developing countries get vaccination rates up and stamp out polio while there's still time. Frontline staff like Claudia do their best. But as with smallpox, international cooperation is the only answer. And cooperation is also urgent on COVID-19, which is still spreading here and elsewhere. So disease hunters are collaborating worldwide. From Iceland to Singapore, they're using the latest technology to hunt and fight the new coronavirus as it spreads and mutates. Many countries still have their borders shut tight to visitors. But Iceland is trying a different approach. New arrivals at Reykjavik Airport are swabbed for COVID-19, then go into 5 days quarantine. If they test negative at the end of that period, they're free to go. But despite the apparent normalcy here, disease hunters are hard at work. They're tracking COVID-19 in real time, making Iceland a kind of genetic laboratory. A local company with a long history in studying genetics and disease is taking the lead. Hundreds of thousands of blood samples gathered over the years are kept at a constant minus 24 degrees. The company has been sequencing the DNA of every Icelander. Now the founder is applying the same approach to COVID-19.
Every time we started to work on a new disease, we had to answer the question, what is it that has yet to be understood about this disease? And then all of a sudden we have in our lab a disease with all questions unanswered. So in many ways that was generated a feast for us.
Swabs arrive at Decode from the airport and testing centres every hour or so. The company is sequencing the genetic code of every positive COVID-19 case. The first step is isolating the virus's RNA. Then other tests are done to confirm the positive case and do the precise genetic sequencing.
A tourist was weakly positive, probably recovered. So that's how it looks here. That makes sense.
This virus is a string of almost 30,000 repetitions of the letters A, U, G, and C, representing different proteins. When cells make copies, there are sometimes typos, and a mutation occurs when one of the letters changes, such as from an A to a G.
Transmission chains. So
Decode is taking those mutations and mapping out a kind of growing family tree, connecting the infections to each other.
We could, from the very beginning, determine the geographic origin of the virus in every single case in Iceland. So having the sequence of the virus gives you an overview of where the virus is coming from, who is infecting whom, determine whether there is a lot of infected people coming into the country or whether this is simply a community spread.
Understanding the mutations and path of the virus also helps make decisions much faster than in the past. The scientists determined that children were less likely to spread the virus, so local schools stayed open. The Decode scientists are sharing their information with other disease hunters around the world on a database called GISAID. It was started for influenza, but has taken on an urgent new role. At Singapore's A-Star, Sebastian Maura-Stroh checks in on a team processing the incoming GISAID information.
Shah, how many sequences do we have from Iceland? Have you seen that we got new sequences from Moldova and Montenegro? These were the very first ones.
Singapore is working with teams in Europe and South America to keep the system going 24 hours a day. They curate the genetic sequences, then upload them, so scientists can see how the virus is changing around the world.
Now it will pop up. That's okay, because we want the coloring at the branches. I'm using computers to hunt viruses or to hunt mutations in viruses. And since they move very fast, we also need to move fast. The area that we are in, bioinformatics, allows you to make sense out of the sequences relatively quickly. In the computer, sometimes we get this new sequence in, and within minutes, we know that's something interesting, that's something new.
A-Star's powerful server crunches all the terabytes of information, with more than 100,000 genetic sequences processed so far. This produces detailed databases and 3D models which scientists everywhere can access for free. This is the coronavirus's spike. The colored dots are mutations.
You constantly need to keep a lookout because the virus changes, often in random positions, But if it affects where your detection happens, then you need to react to that. Sometimes drug resistance can occur. Exactly, and you can see that in the 3D structure of the virus, where the drug binds, and then you have a mutation, and then the drug cannot bind anymore. This is both for treatment with antibodies as well as for vaccines. That's why it's good and important to have this constant flow of sequences.
And the massive flow of data is speeding up vaccine development, focusing on precise areas of a virus. A leading vaccine approach modifies another virus to mimic the coronavirus's spike. The immune system responds in two ways. Immune cells outside the virus trigger antibodies that bind to the surface. Other immune cells go inside and respond on a cellular level. This process might offer longer-lasting immunity. And a lot of this is thanks to the work of the disease hunters, quickly sharing their data with each other and the world.
I hope this served as a blueprint for future outbreaks, and it can be applied to the new diseases.
Future outbreaks, new diseases. Are they inevitable? And what lessons are we learning? Back in Bangkok, Superporn has not finished analysing her samples to see if Thai bats carry the same virus that caused the original COVID-19 outbreak in China. The verdict so far, no sign of the virus. So danger is averted for now. But there's been a wake-up call. It seems we need to change how we interact with the natural world and step up scientific surveillance, where the city meets the forest in ways we didn't plan for. And our disease hunters will continue their work. As the next virus gets ready to spill over, they'll do their best to keep humanity safe.